Every sales and marketing team that we work with has the same problem. Their best AI workflows live in a dock on one person's laptop. They don't run on their own, and they're not wired to the tools that the team already uses, and nobody else ever gets them. Well, Claude's new plugins feature fixes exactly that. And so in this video, I'm going to be showing you exactly what a plugin is, where it pays off across sales, marketing, and customer support, and then we'll build one live from start to finish. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly how to take a workflow that your team already does by hand and package it into one that the entire team can install in one click, even if you've never built a Claude plugin before. If you're new here, my name is Yaseen. I spent the last 12 years as an entrepreneur and founder across 4 different industries, previously partnered with the startups of Google Ventures and Goldman Sachs to scale, and now my team and I help simplify AI and implement it into businesses. And on this channel, I share what we're seeing is proven and working right now. Practical AI and business. So let's jump right into it. So let's start off by talking about what a plugin actually is. And the easiest way to understand what a plugin is we're actually just going to go ahead and build one. And we're going to go ahead and start building one inside of Cowork as opposed to doing it in something like Claude Code. The reason is because we're seeing that most of the teams that we're working with are working inside of Claude Cowork. And so if I go ahead and launch Claude Cowork, you'll see I can go ahead and hit new task. I'm going to go ahead and paste this prompt in here. Now I will have this prompt in the description down below, but it's quite frankly something that you could just put together yourself as well. But you'll see it just says, build me a plugin called Lead Rescue. What it does is it looks through all of our customers' inquiries inside of Salesforce and it flags the ones that are going to be falling through the cracks. It's also going to go ahead and define what tools it's going to need. And the reason why that's important is because a plugin does ship with an entire workflow and tools. We'll talk about that in just a second. And then it goes ahead and talks about what that automation is going to be as well. So now I'm going to go ahead and launch that. We'll come back to that in just a second. But what I want to do is I want to talk to you a little bit more about what a plugin is and how that differs from a skill. So as you're going to see is that a plugin is really just a packaged workflow. It's a box, it's a container, it's really ultimately just a folder that's going to have not only the skill itself, but it's also going to have the wiring that is needed for whenever the rest of your team runs that plugin. It's going to have all of the different connectors for the different tools that are going to be inside of the tech stack, as well as something called hooks. We'll talk about that just a little bit more in a second, but that's the deterministic code that allows the LLM to be a little bit more precise in its output, as well as it does ship with inbuilt something called sub-agents or specialists. And so that's ultimately what a plugin is. It's just a workflow that is a folder that packages all of that together. And so the difference between a skill and a plugin is quite substantial because a skill, if you're not familiar with it, it's basically just a file that you load inside of an AI that tells it what it can do. But the skill is really just one task that Claude can do. It allows you to be able to go ahead and give it to other team members. That's not really the big difference between a plugin and a skill. A plugin, on the other hand, is actually the entire workflow. It's wired up and packaged as one thing. So that way the plugin not only has the skill inside of it, but like we just talked about, it has the connector, it has the hook, and it has the sub agents as well. It's really the entire workflow all put together in one box. So that way you can hand that to the team. So that way it's ready to go. So the first one is going to be that thing that I was talking about, which is a hook. And the easiest way to see this is if I go ahead and open up inside of Claude, and then I go over to customize, you'll see that I have a couple different plugins here on the left side. And if I go ahead and go over to this toolkit one that I've gone ahead and created, what you're going to see is that inside of this toolkit, which is really just a plugin, you'll see that we have a number of different skills that are located in here. So you'll see that you can actually have multiple skills inside of this plugin. You'll see that we have a number of connectors as well. In this case, it's the everything connector. So anything that I have connections to, it's going to have connections to as well. We then also have something called sub agents. In this case, you'll see that we have a Sockwell explainer as well as a transcript cleaner. And we'll talk a little bit more about sub agents in just a second. This is what I wanted to refer to. This is going to be a hook. And what a hook is, it's a piece of code that is something called deterministic. A little bit of a fancy word. You don't have to worry too much about it, but deterministic means that it's precise. And so if you know anything about how AI works, there's something called large language models. They're probabilistic, hence the reason why they hallucinate. They get stuff wrong sometimes because they're designed to be able to play in the gray area. However, sometimes you need something to be a little bit more deterministic. You need it to be precise, hence the reason why a hook can fire. And so when a hook fires, what that means is if I go over to a new task and I say, hi, how are you? What it's doing is behind the scenes, there's actually something called a hook, a piece of code that is firing behind the scenes that allows you to be able to go ahead and get something more precise. So that way, before it outputs something to the user, it has to check what that hook is going to be. And so to make this a little bit practical, because I know I'm going a little bit into the weeds here, is that, for example, if you have something like a pipeline hygiene plugin, right? Pipeline hygiene means that you have deals that are inside of the pipeline for the sales team. Well, you might want a hook that would scan the deal ahead of time before it would output the information about the deal to the sales rep, right? In addition to that, let's say, for example, you wanted a campaign brief that was going to be for the marketing team. Well, you might have a hook that before it outputs any sort of post or email, it's going to have a hook that would run on any of the brand guidelines or check any of the claims that would be inside of the output before it output to the user, right? And so it's basically some sort of evaluation metric that would allow the AI to be precise in its output. So that's the first capability that plugins unlock, which is the ability to go ahead and ship a hook that is something that you cannot do inside of just a skill. The second thing is going to be the connectors. When we talk about connectors that are located inside of plugins, we're talking about all of the other systems that the plugin is going to need to touch. Let's say it's going to need access to the CRM. It's going to need access to email, to analytics, whatever it might be, all the other tools outside of Claude itself. Maybe you need Salesforce, maybe you need whatever other tool. So what's going to happen is that inside of the plugin itself, you can ship with the connectors. So that way, whenever a certain plugin is run, you can have all of those wirings ahead of time. So the user who's then using that, let's say it's a sales rep, somebody who's in marketing, somebody who's in customer success, somebody who's in customer support, they would already have all of those tools baked in when they're going ahead and running the plugin. The third capability that this is then going to unlock is the ability to go ahead and also ship inside of the plugin something called sub-agents. If you're not familiar with this, sub-agents are incredibly powerful because you can have the main agent, which is the main chat window of Claude, going out and actually spinning up sometimes dozens of sub-agents, sometimes it's only a couple sub-agents. But the point is that main agent can actually then delegate work to various other sub-agents. And so inside of the plugin, you might want to have a specific sub-agent for that specific task that the plugin is going to run on. So let's say, for example, it's going to be pipeline hygiene. You might have a deal risk specialist who has an instruction file that's inside of the plugin that the main agent would execute on. So that way that deal risk specialist, who is now trained specifically on that task, can do things inside of that plugin. Same thing, you might have a brand voice specialist who's then going to do the same thing for, let's say, the marketing team. And so that's another piece of this entire puzzle that the plugins can ship with is going to be sub-agents. And so when we talk about how does this all pay off, I want to make this even more practical for you so that way you can really start to get an idea of how do you then use plugins as different use cases within every function, within every department. So let's say, for example, we're talking about in sales. Well, inside of sales, you want to make sure that your team is talking to prospects all day long and they're not having to handle all of the different admin that they need to do during the day. And so what you could do is you could create multiple different plugins for that. So for example, you might have a post-call plugin that would take the transcript from the call, it would draft what the email would look like, as well as go ahead and update the CRM. You might have a pipeline hygiene plugin, which is looking at all of the open deals in order to flag which ones are missing any next action steps. So that way the CRM as well as the pipeline and the forecast for the sales team can stay accurate. You might have a morning brief plugin that would go ahead and look at all of the different messages, emails, unanswered pieces, the 3 highest leverage moves that the sales rep or the marketing team would need to focus on for that particular day. You might also then have a pre-call prep plugin that would go ahead and make sure that the sales team is never walking into a specific call cold. So that way there's a 1-page brief that they're getting ahead of time, which is who are they going ahead and meeting with, what is the deal stage currently, any prior call recap that they might need, as well as any questions that they might want to ask that would be at the Venn diagram of the customer's pain points as well as the product that we offer, so that the sales rep is already prepped going into the call with the prospect. What about marketing team plugins? We talk about a campaign brief. How do you go ahead and pull all of last week's numbers in terms of marketing, being able to spot what's working ahead of time, and then drafting this upcoming week's on-brand angles before anything gets logged in terms of a new campaign? You might have a brand guardian that we talked about, making sure that everything stays on brand for the marketing team. You might also then have a pre-published checklist that would make sure that before anything ships out, it's going ahead and drafting compared to what needs to be the objectives for the marketing team, right? That would be a bunch bunch of different marketing plugins that you could go ahead and build as well. When we talk about being able to keep customers, customer success, customer support, going ahead and having a renewal radar plugin that would go ahead and surface usage-based pieces if that's the type of business that you run, or any open tickets from a customer support standpoint, flag any customers that might be in risk of not being able to continue or renew their contract with us. When you look at potentially having a review meeting preps, so let's say, for example, you have enterprise customers and you're going to have somebody from the customer support, customer success team who's going to be meeting with those customers. You can have all of the decks already assembled ahead of time for that specific customer, as well as an at-risk watch to see whenever there is an account that is having a signal that's dropping below a certain threshold, you can have a plugin that would surface that to customer success and customer support. Of course, behind the scenes, you can then have plugins when it comes to managing and cleaning up the CRM dedupe, forecast rollups, having a routing guardrail, so that way whenever a new lead comes in, how do you make sure that it gets to the right person on the sales team? That would be something that's behind the scenes. And then, of course, you can start to imagine where you can go with leadership and dashboards and rolling up all these things. The use cases for plugins is really endless. And that really is the unlock here, is that what you do with these plugins is that you build them once and then the whole team is able to go ahead and run it. And so it's a little bit different than you might have a skill or a shared doc that never gets really implemented. But what happens is that one person goes ahead and just has to build it one time. You can then go ahead and disperse this onto the team's marketplace or the organization's marketplace. I have other videos on this, which is Claude's function, Claude's mechanism and feature of how you go ahead and disperse plugins across the entire organization is known as a marketplace. But then the cool thing is that the entire team can then just with one click go ahead and download that. And then the beautiful thing is that whenever anybody's running any one of these plugins, if somebody finds that there's a way to be able to improve it, they can go ahead and push that update into the plugin. Of course, there's other pieces there in terms of security, permissions, and governance, but you get the point, is that you can then update the plugin and make sure that the entire team is able to get the most updated version of that workflow across the entire organization. Incredibly powerful, and something that allows you to then be able to leverage AI across every function and every department in the organization. So let's go back over to Claude and see what it went ahead and cooked up for us. So if you go ahead and see what it was doing is it was going ahead and cooking up all of the different pieces that would be needed in order to build a plugin. And that's the cool thing about building plugins, is that you don't need to be technical. You don't need to know too much about computers, any of that. Literally all you need to do is you need to be able to talk to Claude or Gemini or whatever AI that you're using. You need to just be able to talk to it and it'll be able to handle all of the behind the scenes. Based off of this training, you will understand all the pieces that are going to be inside of the plugin as well. So you'll see right here, it went ahead and created the lead rescue plugin, and it says what's inside of it. It has the skill in here. It also has the follow-up specialist agent. And so what this agent is going to do, which is a sub agent, it goes ahead and gets any of the flag records and goes ahead and drafts what the follow-up email is going to be. It also then has the connect to Salesforce skill as well as the session start hook. And so all of that is in here. And then you can just go ahead and click on save plugin, and it's going to go ahead and save that plugin in there. And then if you decided that you were going to go ahead and set up an organization marketplace in order to disperse this across the rest of the team, you could do that as well. And that's it. That's as simple as it gets. It's literally just talking to Claude and going ahead and creating plugins. Quite frankly, the hardest part about working with AI is having the judgment and the taste to then be able to determine what types of plugins you should be building. What are the problems in the organization that you need to be solving? And so now that level of abstraction, that level of thinking and judgment becomes one layer above it, because now execution is unlimited. AI can execute everything. Now you got to figure out, well, what is the right thing to be able to create into plugins and how to actually architect this and design this properly. And so let's talk about where all of this is headed. And I want to kind of give you a bigger macro vision of how all this is going to come in terms of the market dynamics and what's going to happen over the next 6 to 12 months. So the first thing I want to go ahead and encourage you on is go ahead and build one, because making one is literally just a matter of asking, like I just said. And all you got to do is just ask it to go ahead and build one. It's going to build one, and then you can go ahead and validate it. You can go ahead and test it and say, hey, let's go ahead and run this. Let me go ahead and see what this looks like. And then on top of that, if you have existing skills that you have already been using inside of Claude, you can actually give those to Claude and it can go ahead and package them for you into a plugin as well. I would recommend, as a best practices, to in the beginning, keep it minimal, right? Go ahead and just make it something that's basic and then get a feel of how this actually works before you decide to go ahead and throw the entire kitchen sink into it. And then last but not least, you want to make sure that you are just validating them before you're shipping them to the rest of the team. Go ahead and QA it, put some quality assurance behind it. Go ahead and actually run it a few times. Maybe have somebody else on the team run it to make sure that it runs properly before you go ahead and give it to the entire team. And so that's going to be the action step for this specific video that I would highly encourage you is go ahead and create your first plugin this week. Figure out what is the actual problem that you find that you run into quite a bit. Maybe it's a weekly report that you find, oh man, I have to do this manually every single time. Well, go ahead and actually make it into a plugin and see how much more productivity you can get out of this. What we're seeing with the teams that we work with is we're seeing that with AI, X the outputs with about 10 to 25% of the headcount. Imagine that. So what would normally have taken you 100 days to do, you can now do in 1 day. And you can do it with 10% of the headcount because of all of these tools that are now coming out, because of the power of AI and the agents when you use them in this way. And so when we talk about where all of this is headed is that you have to understand that the shift is already underway. The team's best workflows are going to stop living inside of people's heads and out of people's Google documents, and they're going to start getting shipped as software that you can now program with your normal speech. And when we say software, that's kind of what you can think of a plugin is. It's like a mini software that the entire team is then implementing inside of their AI, and it has version control. It can actually improve. And the key thing is that it then compounds. Every single time somebody runs it and finds a way to be able to improve on it, the AI just goes ahead and updates the plugin, which again, you don't have to do. You just tell Claude, you tell the AI, hey, go ahead and update the plugin based off of what it is that we've learned, and it'll go ahead and do that. And so this then becomes an asset that compounds for you. And the beautiful thing is that these are all just folders, markdown files, JSON files. You don't have to know the complexity of it, but they're really just open standards. And so it doesn't matter if it's Claude today and it's Gemini tomorrow, or it's OpenAI the day after that. All of these are going to be different pieces and assets that are going to travel along with you, because this is the IP of the organization. These are the workflows that your organization and teams run off of that you now have to be able to go ahead and give to whatever AI comes out down the road. And the reason why this is important for you and your teams is because the edge is going to come to the teams that get on this early. Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, recently said that if you're not using AI right now, then you're going to be spending all of 2027 catching up to the teams that were using AI in 2026. Because as you're seeing, this starts to compound, and those teams that are running now at the speed are going to be able to do so, and then all the other teams are going to have to catch up to them later. And so the edge is being early and being able to go ahead and create what those workflows are, and creating those IP and the assets that are going to live inside of your organization. A skill is just one task that Claude can do. A plugin is the entire workflow that's then wired up, packaged, and handed to the entire team. That is the gap between just a task that Claude can do and an entire capability that the entire organization runs on. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a plugin.